Hi guys, I hope you're all doing well and surviving this long break that we have from school. Today we're just going to go over fashion history. We're going to start with 1890 and then go until 1940. So as we go through this, just jot down a couple of little notes because at the end of the video I want you to go back to Canvas and answer a couple of matching questions. But first, I want you to keep in mind that fashion history is history because what happens in the world dictates the things that are worn in the different eras. So remember that. We'll talk a little bit about the different things that are happening in each of the eras. And then also pay attention to the fact that fashion trends repeat every 20 to 30 years, especially things like silhouette. So as you see certain kind of silhouettes or design details, those are going to come back around every 20 to 30 years. So pay attention to that. So each era or decade is defined by a silhouette in women's fashion. So if you remember from Unit 1, silhouette is the outside area of an outfit. So if you black out the entire person and the details, it's what the outside shape is. And each era has its own silhouette. So we're going to get started, and we're going to start with 1890. So 1890 is the Victorian Era. Queen Victoria is on the throne in England, and even though it's way over in England, the fashions still kind of dictate what we wear in America. So the silhouette in the 1890s was the extreme hourglass. You wanted to have a teeny tiny waist. Now I know some of you are looking at this picture and being like, that's totally photoshopped. It's not, all right? The smallest waist was smaller than 15 inches. And they achieved that extreme hourglass, that teeny tiny waist, by wearing a corset. And we'll talk about corsets in just a second. All right, so we're going to go over men and women's fashion in the different eras. So for women, it was the Gibson girl. Next was the corset. And 3, they wore a bustle. For men, they had a matching coat and vest, and then contrasting trousers. So I'm going to show you pictures of each of these so that it makes a little bit more sense. So the Gibson girl was done by an artist. His last name was Gibson, and he did these pictures of women that had really soft features. Their hair was like loosely piled on their head, and this image, or these images, were everywhere. All right, they were in magazines, advertisement, billboards. It was like the epitome of what a beautiful American woman should look like, is a Gibson girl. All right, next is the corset. So the corset is worn right above the bust, and it goes down right to the top of the hips. All right, in the front there's whaleboning to help keep it cinched in, and then in the back there are these laces, and someone would stand behind the woman and pull those laces in until it was as tight as it could be, and make the waist small. So if you look at this woman who's tying the corset laces on this young girl, her foot is actually on her backside to give her more leverage so she can really cinch in that waist. Now, corsets are dangerous. It cracks your ribs. It's not healthy to get all of your internal organs that small and squished together. So there were a lot of problems with it, but that's what women did to achieve that really extreme hourglass. All right, and then last is the bustle. So the bustle is an extra padding of fabric that's worn under your dress to give you that kind of hump on your backside. Now, we do have modern day bustles in things like weddings, wedding attire, especially if there's like a big bow or design elements on the back. But that's what a bustle is. It's just an extra, it's almost like a small pillow that you tie around your hips to give you that big bump. All right, for men, they had a matching coat and vest. All right, so if you look at this picture, his vest and his jacket match. All right, and then there's contrasting trousers. So typically, these two are the same fabric, and then their trousers or their pants are a darker fabric. Sometimes there would be pinstripes in it, but it's just different than the coat and the vest. All right, next is the Edwardian Era. So Queen Victoria dies, her son Edward takes the throne, and he kind of changes some things in society. The biggest thing is there's advancements in technology. So this is the time of the Industrial Revolution, when back east in America, people left their farms and started to work in factories in like New York, Chicago, Boston. This is also when the automobile is introduced, and so more and more families switch from horse and carriage to automobiles, and also electricity. Now, in the West, it's still agriculture. All right, so if you lived in the West, you would still live on a farm. You probably didn't go to a factory for your job. So there's kind of two distinct styles in the 1900s, depending on where you lived. Right, the silhouette in the 1900s is the S curve. So the S curve is really similar to the hourglass, except there's more emphasis on the booty and the bust. All right, so that it forms this kind of S curve. All right, women's fashion, we have the duster coat, the shirtwaist, the Lego mutton sleeve. And for men, we have formal or morning dress with top hat, the three-piece lounge suit, and the bowler hat. So let's look at some of these pictures. All right, a duster coat. Because the first automobiles didn't really have sides or even a roof, and they were riding along on dirt roads, the dust would fly up. And so they designed these really long, loose coats that went over your dress. Often you wore a big hat with a scarf around your face, goggles, to keep the dust off of your clothing. Okay, the shirtwaist is a separate skirt and shirt. All right, before this, it's all one piece, but with the invention of the shirtwaist, it allowed women to have more options because they could have just one skirt and then a couple of blouses and just change that as it got dirty or they needed to. And then last for women's fashion is the Lego mutton sleeve. We talked about these when we did design details. It has the really, really big poof, and then it tapers at the elbow and it's tight to the wrist. For men's fashion, we have a formal morning dress with top hat. So if you look, we still have contrasting trousers, but we have a formal jacket and then a top hat. Then during the day, after you were done with your morning visits, you would change into your three-piece lounge suit. So this is a modern take on a three-piece lounge suit, but you have trousers, a jacket, and a vest. And then there was also a bowler hat. So a bowler hat is because it looks like an upside down bowl on your head, except it has a brim. So those are the fashions from the 1900s. In 1910, this is when we have World War I, and women are trying to get the right to vote. So our silhouette is the inverted triangle. All right. Anytime women's issues kind of come to the forefront in society, the inverted triangle is going to show up. We're going to see it a couple of different times as we talk about history. But women want the right to vote. They want strength. They want to be seen as powerful. So the thing that we kind of equate with powerful is broad shoulders. All right, there's also the hobble skirt, bathing suit, and bloomers. For men, there's a military influence because of the war and trench coats. Oops. So the hobble skirt. The hobble skirt is a really long skirt that tapers at the ankle. All right, so if you look, it's really, really narrow down here. And the reason they call it the hobble skirt is because you have to take really, really tiny steps, like super tiny steps to walk in that thing. Sometimes they would have a band around the knees to even take smaller steps. All right, here's another example of different hobble skirts. You can see they're kind of narrow, very straight, but you can also see that these tops or the jackets that they're wearing kind of give that inverted triangle because it makes their shoulders appear broader. All right, here's the first bathing suits that appeared in the 1910s. All right, they had to be careful because there were police officers on the beach making sure that they were modest and not showing too much leg. And then the last one for women is the bloomer. Because it's hard to ride a bike in a skirt, let alone a hobble skirt, they decided to kind of slit it up and then sew it so it looks like pants. All right, but when you're standing there, it still looks like a dress or a skirt. All right, so for men's fashion, there's going to be a lot of like military decor on jackets, military style hats, and then the trench coat. All right, the 20s. So we have the Roaring 20s. This is when Prohibition is in the United States, so alcohol is illegal. It's seen as the era of decadence. A lot of you did your research on the 20s. I think people are fascinated just because it does seem so extravagant. Also, women cut their hair. They did not wear corsets, and their hemline raises, so it goes to their knees. Right, the silhouette for the 20s is the tubular or rectangle. Because there's no corsets, there is no real definition of the waist. It's very straight up and down. So for women, we have the flapper, costume jewelry becomes popular, the cloche hat, and the drop waist. For men, there's trousers that are creased along the leg, and then the pant leg is very wide. There's the modern two-piece suit and wingtip shoes. So let's look at some of these to kind of explain it. So you all should know what a flapper is. The top picture shows an actual flapper from the 20s. You can see that it's very straight up and down, drop waist. There's no emphasis on the waist at all. And then the bottom one is kind of a Halloween costume of a flapper, but even then, it's very straight up and down in silhouette, and it has the dropped waist. All right, costume jewelry. So because you wanted to be seen as like rich and having all of these things, fake pearls and fake diamonds became really popular, and you wanted to wear them all at once. So when you see pictures of flappers or pictures from the 20s, they have rows and rows and rows of bracelets and necklaces and rings on every finger. All right, none of it was real, it was all fake. That's why we call it costume jewelry, but it was just to show how fashionable you were. All right, a cloche hat is a hat that's shaped like your head, and it's worn really close and down, almost covers your eyebrows, and then it has a short brim. And then the dropped waist. Again, we're not in corsets, so there's no definition of the waist. For men in the 20s, here's those wide leg trousers with the big crease in it. And so they would just use an iron to make sure that they could get that really sharp, crisp crease down the center of each leg. Like if you look at all of these, well, you can't really see it in that one, but they all have that crease down the center of their leg. Right? So vests kind of go out the door in the 20s. We just want pants and a jacket made of matching fabrics. So that's why we call it the modern two-piece suit, because there's not a vest involved. And then wingtip shoes. So they call them wingtips because as you look down at your feet, this detail right here looks like a bird. All right, usually wingtips were done in two contrasting colors, like white and black, but that right there looks like a wingtip, or looks like a bird. At the 30s, so the 30s is the Depression. Because people don't have money, they look to Hollywood for escape, and that's where the term Hollywood glam comes from. Women are back in corsets, and hemlines drop. All right, so our silhouette, we're back to hourglass, not the extreme hourglass, but the waist is emphasized again. So for women, we have bias cut dresses. The waistline is restored, hemlines are dropped, not necessarily to their feet, but at least to their shin. And then we have flour sack clothing. For men, it's a double-breasted suit, padded shoulders, and Glen plaid fabric. So here's a bias cut dress. Bias cut means that you take the pattern and you put it on the fabric so that it's on the diagonal, and that is what gives these curves or this draping on this dress. It also creates like a different kind of sheen to the dress. Right here you can see examples of the waistline is restored. For men, the double-breasted suit. So if you remember, double-breasted means there's two rows of buttons on either side and you can button it either way, right or left. And then here's Glen plaid fabric. It became popular for the jacket and the pants to be made out of that. And then flour sacks. Because it was the Depression and nobody could afford clothing, women started to use the sack that flour was shipped in. It used to be in cloth. So it wasn't uncommon to see little kids running around with like Pillsbury on their clothes or Metal Gold or whatever the flour brand was. So the companies realized that and started making prints, flour sack prints. And that way they could wear dresses that didn't say the brand name. It had florals. All right, last one. 1940s is World War II. Fabric is rationed, so some things are not available. And Couture leaves Paris and moves to New York. So our silhouette is the inverted triangle. Women were leaving home to go and work in the jobs that men had worked before they were shipped off to war. So women have more independence because they're making the money for their families. We have convertible suit, slacks. There's no silk or nylon for stockings. Men wore a bomber jacket, austere victory suits with no vest, And then no cuffs or pocket